Hello Year 4, welcome back. Well, we finished The Explorer, didn't we, a few days ago. That was very exciting. And we've had so many of you email us to say that you love listening to the stories and that you listen to one chapter every day and what we're going to read next. So Miss Stone and Miss King and I put our heads together and we thought maybe we'd like to read you one of our favourites. A kind of what's called a classic. So we're going to start reading to you a book called Charlotte's Web. Now, some of you will have read it before. Some of you will have seen the movie. Some of you will have heard of it but not read it. And we were hoping that even if you have read it before and even if you have seen the movie, you might enjoy listening to us read it to you. And if you've never read it before, well, that's just marvellous and you're in for a real treat. So before I start reading a book, I like to know a little bit about the author. So this author, E.B. White, is male, because can't really guess because we've only got the initials, haven't we? He's male and he's American and he used to live on a farm. And his inspiration from Charlotte's Web came from sitting in his barn one day and watching a spider spinning an egg sac in the corner of the barn. And he thought it was so incredible that it inspired him to write a book with a spider as one of the key characters. He's also very famous for saying, "Always be on the lookout for the presence of wonder." In other words, if you're looking, you're quite often going to see something wonderful. If you look carefully, if you look in a place where you might not expect to see it, like a barn. If you've ever seen a spider spinning a web, it is amazing. So intricate, really wonderful. Always be on the lookout for the presence of wonder. So now we know a bit more about him and we know a bit about what inspired this book. Let me read you the blurb. Better look at the front cover first though. This is my front cover. Of course it's going to vary from book to book because we know front covers change through the years and depending on the publisher. But this is the front cover that I've got, Charlotte's Web. This is a story of a girl called Fern who loves a little pig called Wilbur, and of how Wilbur's dear friend Charlotte, a Kivatica, a beautiful grey spider, saves Wilbur from the usual fate of nice fat pigs by a wonderfully clever plan which no one else could possibly have thought of. What would be the fate of nice fat pigs on a farm? I think you probably know. And how does this beautiful spider, Charlotte, save Wilbur? Let's read and find out. Charlotte's Web, Chapter 1. Before breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "Well, I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably die anyway." Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. Please, please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arable stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you will have to learn to control yourself. Control myself? Yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself. And tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. There's a picture of Fern doing that. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now, run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I'd have been very small when I was born, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is quite another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging onto the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I have ever heard of. A strange look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. All right, he said. You go back to the house and I'll bring the little runt when I come in. I'll let you raise it on a bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast and the room smelt of coffee, bacon, damp plaster and wood smoke from the stove. Push it on the chair, said Mrs. Arable, and Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying, and as she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father, and then she lifted the lid of the carton, and there, inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one, and the morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death, and may the Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered. Oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the carton carefully, and first she kissed her father, and then she kissed her mother, and then she opened the lid again, and she lifted the pig out and held it against her cheek. And at this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10, and he was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand and a wooden dagger in the other. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arable. Now wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be along in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Now let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle. She poured warm milk into the bottle. She fitted the top and she handed it to Fern. "Give him his breakfast," she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. "Run!" commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a doughnut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another doughnut. It's a little picture of Fern feeding her little piglet, look. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. "Its name is Wilbur," she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, "Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania?" "Wilbur," replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. Hope you've enjoyed the opening chapter. Listen in. Mrs. Stone's turn to read chapter 2 to you. Bye for now, Year 4. Take care.